Thank you, Laura. Good morning. After almost 2 months of peaceful protests in support of Black Lives Matter, we are faced again with violence and destruction in our city's downtown core. It is a credit to our Eugene Police Department and to the organizers of 2 months of protests that we have, as a community, been able to listen and begin to plan constructive steps forward. I'm proud of our community's ability to do this. It is not easy. The anger is real, the need for reform and action is real, and we must keep this work front and center. I have 3 things to say. First, these violent actions are unacceptable and unworthy. The antagonizing presence of heavily armed counter-protesters, including one who shot his gun in the middle of the event on Saturday, have only added unnecessary fuel to create a more volatile situation. Their actions are not welcome here. A smaller group who were not affiliated with the larger demonstration took advantage of a peaceful protest to incite violence and destruction. These actions are intended to derail constructive progress, and they are intended to increase tension. This is not a path we will follow. Second, our city is embracing the work before us to address police reform and structural racism. Strong new leadership has emerged through the Black Lives Matter movement. Our police chief and his department have thoughtfully and candidly voiced and acted on their commitment to creating a safety system in which all people in our community can feel safe and well served. Our city council has acted swiftly and responsively to engage communities of color in reviewing police policies and the city's investments in community safety. This work will continue and strengthen. It will not be deterred or derailed by acts of destruction like those we experienced on Saturday night. Third, the businesses of our downtown core are our community's lifeblood. As we recover from the economic impacts of the pandemic, we will depend on these local employers to rebuild and to bring people back to work. There is no equity of opportunity if there are no businesses upon which to build those opportunities. We will protect the center of our city because it is our center and it holds our future. Our police department will do the work they are commissioned to do. They will hold people accountable for criminal behavior, and they will protect the rights and lives of peaceful protesters. And now, I am proud to turn the podium over to my colleague, Councilor Greg Evans.
Thank you, Mayor Vinis, for those words of encouragement and support. I want to say 3 things. First and foremost, the activities that have been happening over the weekend, as far as Black Lives Matter is concerned, and the violence that has occurred and the vandalism that has occurred, will not be tolerated. We will not tolerate this. We're going to act substantially, and we're going to be focused in terms of supporting supporting the Black Lives Matter movement where there are peaceful protests. And there have been peaceful protests. There are a few bad actors out there that have attempted to take this movement over in Eugene and some other places for their own purposes. And they're going to do what they want to do. However, if they're going to engage in violence, they're going to engage in vandalism, property destruction, we're not putting up with that. There's 0 tolerance for that. Our police department is working hard to de-escalate the situations that are out there. They have demonstrated restraint in addressing these issues. The first situation that we had several weeks ago taught us many lessons, but this has been ongoing, and I think that it will continue to be ongoing. The council has done a couple of things. The first thing that we did was craft a message in support of Black Lives Matter, the movement, and the issues that these folks are trying to address. The second thing is council back last Monday, we passed a bill, if you will, to formulate a new ad hoc committee of short duration that is going to be looking at policies, procedures, tactics of the police force, and reviewing that. And that committee is going to be made up of predominantly people of color. We have asked Black Unity to be part of that, the NAACP, LULAC, Blacks in Government, most of the big organizations of color in this community are behind us. And we're going to find solutions. We're going to work with Chief Skinner closely to make sure that Eugene is a model, and it will be a model for other cities to follow. And we're going to make this the most equitable place in America. I promise you that. And the effort is there. 6 out of 8 of us signed a statement in support of Black Lives Matter. But we are only supportive for the peaceful activities that these folks are engaged in. No violence, no justice, no peace. If we're peaceful, nonviolent, then we will get to justice. All right. And I'm going to turn the podium over now to Chief Skinner. Chief Skinner.
Thank you, Councilor Evans. I'll try and talk loud so that you can hear me, and then, of course, when I'm done, we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers, as I'm sure you have those questions. It's a busy weekend for Eugene Police Department. We spent all weekend trying to create space for people to be heard, and for the voices to be heard, and for the important issues to be raised around how we manage racial inequality and police reform. And for the most part, people did a really good job of coming out and letting their voices be heard. And it's unfortunate that yet again we're having a conversation about a small group of individuals that after 3+ hours of being heard felt like what being heard meant to them was to damage local businesses and public property, and to throw rocks at police officers, damaging police cars and hitting officers with rocks. And so I think it's important to know that we have those two groups out there, and that we continue to support people's ability to be heard. And we have done that since late May, the first night that we had the riotous behavior at 7th and Washington. The Eugene Police Department's at a place right now where we continue to manage these the very best we can. But maybe more importantly, the Eugene Police Department is in a place where we're ready to be at the table and have productive conversations and talks about outcomes, about what policing looks like in Eugene, about what community safety looks like in Eugene. And not on necessarily on a national level, because it's not a one-size-fits-all type of proposition. It's about what fits in Eugene, because we are unique. It's not about taking policies and philosophies from the East Coast or other regions. It's about Eugene, and it's about what this community wants when they think about community safety. And so we're ready to put our energy into that. And we're ready to step back from having to manage protests around this particular issue and put our energy into sitting at the table with people that want to have the kind of conversations that come to some really good outcomes on this police department and community safety. So I look forward to that opportunity. I know the council last Monday took the first steps in providing a framework for us to do that. I'll look forward to being a part of that wherever that fits and wherever that's appropriate. And looking forward to some of the outcomes and the good dialogue that that's going to produce. So with that, let me open this up for questions, because I'm sure you have some around the weekend's activities. Hi, James. How are you? Good.
A man was arrested last night at Olive and Broadway, approximately 10:50 last night, for allegedly pulling a gun on protesters who were outside the jail. This individual was not booked in Lake County Jail as of this morning. It's going on nearly 12 hours. No press release for this issue. Who is this person, and were they not booked?
Yeah, we did make an arrest last night. I actually personally witnessed the arrest after the individual was reported to unholster a weapon in amongst the protesters. The initial reports were that he pointed the gun at somebody, which is a crime in the state of Oregon, menacing. We made that arrest. I do not have the details of whether he was lodged or just cited and released. I know this weekend we had a lot of capacity-based releases in the jail. There's some concerns around housing inmates in this COVID environment. And so I'll have to get back to you or get you some more information, but I can confirm that we did take somebody into custody for that crime.
They were wearing a helmet that said press. I asked one of your officers last night if they knew if he was legitimately a member of the press or if this was somebody of some kind of subterfuge.
Right.
Were you able to confirm this is a member of a legitimate media organization?
I will tell you that based on what I've witnessed personally is there are dozens of people that are wearing what they believe to be press credentials, whether it's a t-shirt that says press, a homemade identification card, on both the initial protesters and anybody that would be considered a counter protester. Both are doing that. It's concerning because it's really hard to identify the legitimate members of our press when they do that. Luckily, we've not had any conflict, but we've seen that on both sides. A lot of people showing up wearing uniform, for lack of a better term, that identifies them as press.
They were members of the Proud Boys last night who, after the arrest, came to your officers and asked if he could be released to them. Obviously, he was not. Is there any reason to believe that this individual is affiliated with any particular?
Yeah. Don't have any information about that, James. Have no idea who this individual is affiliated with.
There was allegations that he was more interested in taking photos and video of the protesters themselves as means of identification for some cause. Is there any reason to believe he's a member of a agent of the state of some kind, whether it be local, federal, or anything like that?
No information on that. He certainly is not affiliated with the Eugene Police Department. Any other questions?
Chief, there was an organized effort over the weekend by a small group called Antifa. They allegedly said they were going to be in Seattle, Eugene. They were in Seattle, they were in Portland. Can you talk a little bit about what happened in downtown Eugene and if there was any group that said they were going to be at the courthouse at 8 o'clock that you could have maybe identified?
So what we can confirm is we had some intelligence that we'd have people in from out of town. I don't know if that actually materialized or not. Of the individuals we arrested on Saturday, all of those had local Eugene addresses, so we did not arrest anybody from outside of the area on Saturday. But we were monitoring very closely the chatter and some of the social media content that suggested that we'd have people from out of town coming down to Eugene, but I'm just not sure if we actually saw that happen or not.
Does that concern you when you see posts like that identify themselves and say they're coming to an area to...
Well, certainly it concerns me, because what happens is when you have people coming in from out of town, this isn't their community. They don't want to leave it any better than they found it. They get to come in, do what they want to do, and leave without any recourse for the most part. Eugene Police is going to take care of Eugene streets, and Eugene people should be taking care of Eugene community. And so anytime I have people coming in from out of town, I'm concerned, because I don't think they have a vested interest in being able to be productive.
There have been rumors about federal officers being in Eugene, akin to what's going on in Portland. Is there any truth to that at this point?
What I can tell you is any federal officers that have been deployed here inside the federal building and have not exited the federal building. I've been really clear. The Eugene Police Department takes care of Eugene streets. And we work with our federal partners on a variety of things. Human trafficking, internet crimes against children, drug enforcement, domestic terrorism, all of those things are really important to our partnership with the federal government. But when it comes to protecting the streets of Eugene, that's our job. And they've been really respectful about that. And so while they come down and occupy the federal building, there's been no deployment strategy to have them exit that building.
To Skinner, perhaps Mayor Vinis as well, to that issue of what's going on in Portland. This community obviously went through a lot in late May and early June, but for the better part of July, police headquarters, the doors, the fencing were gone. A lot of things had de-escalated, for lack of a better term, and now we're back to seemingly where we were. How much do you believe what has gone on here over the last weekend and potentially into the future is due to the escalation of what's going on in Portland?
I think the Mayor Vinis and I were just having this conversation. It's unfortunate that what we see in Portland has a tendency to manifest itself here in local Eugene. There wasn't a better day for us when we were able to take the boards and the fencing down at EPD. That was a milestone event for us, and more than anything, it was a statement to this community about our trust in the protesters with respect to them being able to continue to be heard without engaging in violence, especially at the PD. It's unfortunate. I don't have any plans on putting boards back up or fences back up. I'm going to continue to extend that trust, but it's not lost on me that what we see in Portland and some of the emotions that we're seeing in Portland have a tendency to manifest themselves down here.
I will just second what the chief said, and the one thing that I would emphasize is that we are not going back to where we were on May 29th, and we have made an enormous amount of progress as a community in terms of moving this conversation forward about the changes that we need to make. And so I consider this this series of events on Saturday night, it's an aberration. It's not going to be the rule. Our work continues, and it will continue.
Skinner, if I may, how would you describe the police department's response to riots thus far? And then where do we go from here? What has to happen to safeguard against this continuing?
That's a great question. When we started this in late May, it was apparent to me that this police department has not had a lot of experience in dealing with crowds like that. And that's a good thing. If you end up getting really, really good at managing riots, then there's something wrong with your community and the society as a whole. We learned a lot from the way we deployed in the early stages of this. We had lessons learned that were beneficial on both sides. We made huge mistakes that we don't want to repeat. But when you're not good at something, you oftentimes need to have a threshold event to reveal the blind spots about your deployment strategies and your tactics, and that's what that did early in May, or late May, but early in the riots. As we've progressed through this, I think we've learned. I think we have grown through this. We've identified tactics that are more successful than others. We've been tempered in our response. House Bill 4208 clearly defines when CS gas can be used, and we're adhering to that to the letter of the law, just like we did on Saturday night with admonishments and declaring a riot only after the significant criminal activity was occurring. And even then, we used it judiciously just to protect officers that were getting rocks thrown at them. So I think that we're evolving and learning on how to deal with these things. And so I'm pleased with the amount of restraint we've shown. Last night, there was a moment where protesters and police came together in the middle and had productive dialogue. And I think even if nothing came out of the dialogue, just the ability to have a civil conversation during a really tense time should be celebrated around where we're at in this moment. And as the mayor pointed out, backsliding right now is not an option. It's moving forward. How are we going to continue to move forward through this time? And so I commend our officers. They're tired, they're exhausted, but they show up every single day ready to deal with this.
Would you say that progress since is part of the reason why there was not a curfew Saturday night, both between the fact that it was a limited area and there was obviously the effort not to do the things that were done lately?
Saturday night the curfew wasn't even discussed for Saturday night. We knew that we were going to have a big protest, James, and we knew that it was going to be emotionally charged, but because of the progress we've made, that's that trust that we knew we wouldn't need a curfew. Now, having said that, it was the small faction of people that stuck around more than 3.5 hours after the peaceful protest to engage in that kind of behavior. But we're not entertaining a curfew into the future. That's our way of extending that level of trust, saying we think you can self-manage, you can be heard, we'll create the space for you to be heard, And when it's time to wind things down, things wind down. And that's what we saw eventually last night, even though it was a little bit of a longer night than usual.
Chief, you're trying to identify, obviously, the people that did the breaking of the windows, spray painting on the buildings. I know that you've got intel and you're trying to follow them. Are you making progress on identifying any one of those people that did these things?
From the earlier protests?
From Saturday night.
Oh, from Saturday night? Well, we made the key arrest Saturday night of the what we believe to be some of the agitators. You certainly can't arrest them all, and it's maybe not appropriate to arrest them all. But of the 8 total of arrests, 7 of those were arrested with some type of riotous behavior. We'll continue to look at footage. We have footage that shows an individual that was originally reported to be an EPD undercover officer, and I can tell you unequivocally that is not anybody associated with the Eugene Police Department. But we're going to pursue trying to find who he is because he engaged in some assaultive behavior. We'll continue to look at video footage and identifying who committed crimes, just like we've been doing for the late May riot that we had at 7th and Washington. We're in the final stages of identifying some people, and then we're going to have some action on that I'll be happy to talk about when we're finally ready to do that. But that's what we do, is we do criminal investigations, and we don't just walk away from a moment like we had last night or on May 29th and say, no harm, no foul. We continue to look and see where we can develop probable cause and hold people accountable.
There was video on Saturday outside the courthouse along the street there just outside the bridge of a motorist in a pickup truck engaging with protesters, each side holding firearms.
Yep.
Is there any information on these individuals? Do you see the information on these individuals?
Yeah, I don't, James. I know that I saw that and I watched that unfold, and we were on our way. We had a hasty team on our way to deal with that because it looked like it could have gone bad in a hurry. And cooler heads prevailed and the truck ended up leaving. We had guns pointed at each other on both sides. And so at that point in the protest, with a number of people around, trying to be strategic about how we get in there to deal with that was a tough one. But we were on our way, and then he drove off. But I don't have any other information about whether or not we're conducting any follow-up on that on either side.
You spoke earlier about just the inherent difficulty in identifying press from individuals who are purporting to be but are clearly not. This was an issue we brought up and addressed, you and I, 7 weeks ago.
Right.
I reached out to Mayor Vinis, the entire city council, your public information officers from both the city and EPD 7 weeks ago, and got no response.
Okay.
Can we all, please, including on this side, please pledge today to come up with a better than ad hoc system and long-term solution for properly identifying members of the press for all parties for safety? When there are guns being drawn,
Right.
when there are individuals who label themselves press drawing guns on individuals,
Yeah.
can we please address this for the long term?
Sure. Understood, James. Understood. Thank you.
During protest events, specifically from the past weekend, do you receive directives or calls?
Communication is one way, and that's me to the city council. City council is really good about understanding that the operational authority rests with me and my cooperation with my city manager. So it is exactly as it should be. They're concerned. They want to be informed. They certainly have some thoughts and ideas that I entertain and have great dialogue with them. But while we're in the middle of dealing with a tense situation, they have 100% trust in my operational ability to handle it, as does the city manager. And I keep her apprised, and we work hand in glove when it comes to those things. So it's very much one way during that time.
And when it comes to the video of the 14-year-old girl that has sparked a lot of conversation,
Sure.
a lot of questions, what can you share about that incident that maybe people did not see?
Right. Social media obviously is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful tool to communicate. Unfortunately, taking a small moment in time with its own unique narration behind it has a tendency to paint a picture that isn't as holistic as it should be. That was a moment in time after the riot had been declared that we were trying to identify key agitators and key agitators that we could actually get to and remove from the crowd strategically. The female was identified as an agitator after she threw rocks at a police car and drug paper boxes into the street to block our ability to drive down the street. And that was from a distance. We're keeping our distance, not trying to get hit with rocks, trying to identify who it is that we might need to go in and pull out of the crowd to de-escalate the crowd. she was one of those individuals that we identified that was engaged in that behavior. We went in to make the arrest. She obviously was resisting. We took her into custody, only then learned that she was a juvenile female, and then very appropriately cited and released her and called her parents and released her to her parents. So that moment in time was depicted a little bit differently. The other question that came up is we also had somebody that was assaulting somebody right in close proximity to where we came in. What I would say is understand when we formulate a plan to go in and get somebody with a small group of individuals and we start moving towards that objective, we don't have the luxury of the shiny object over here diverting our attention. Solely focused on that objective is what those officers were, and that was that female at that time. That doesn't mean that we didn't either recognize or won't address what happened over here, but you can see where having two officers go two different directions or have two different thoughts about what we were doing at that time is not a safe approach. And so when you see the comments about they arrest this 14-year-old female, but they let this other person go, it's not as simple as us being able to change our course of direction midstream from what we were trying to accomplish in that particular moment in time. So she's been cited for the criminal mischief and the riot and released to her parents, and you know, she'll go through the juvenile system like any other juvenile would.
Chief, can you describe, you alluded to rocks being thrown at your officers, describe how dangerous that is, number one, and how they felt about getting pelted with rocks.
It's been interesting where we see rocks being brought to the protest. The rocks being thrown at officers weren't just kind of organically laying around, and these are rocks that are being transported to the protest. We've got a picture that I shared with council that show 50, 60, 70 rocks laying in the middle of the street, all of which are baseball sized, that were being thrown at officers. We had officers hit with rocks and bruised, no major injuries. Actually had a couple officers hit in the head, but they were wearing their helmets, thankfully. Cars hit, those types of things. But again, those aren't the majority of the protesters we're dealing with are not showing up in backpacks and rocks. The ones that are showing up with backpacks filled with rocks are the ones that have a tendency to stay around long after the peaceful protesters decide to go home for the evening, back to their families and loved ones, and then engage in that behavior. So we're paying attention to those tactics. As far as getting rocks thrown at us, you know, we could come up with all sorts of metaphors about throwing rocks right now. It's kind of our job. We know that. We're going to keep ourselves safe, but you know, we're prepared for that, and we're mindful of that when we think about the tactics we need to use.
This is a question for the mayor. So, with all of the businesses that were vandalized and also all of the vandalism on public property, is there any plan through the city to do any cleanup or any sort of financial assistance to those businesses at this point?
Certainly we would assist with some cleanup, and certainly we would entertain what they need. I don't have a specific answer for what the city might do, but this is part of our overall economic recovery plan for COVID. We want to make sure that our businesses are recovering and able to thrive, and if they've got a lot of broken windows, that obviously impedes their capacity to do that. So I would think that something would be forthcoming.
And you said that it was a smaller group that was doing the damage downtown, but it was still quite a sizable group, arguably not the whole group from when it started, but it was still pretty large. Is that changing how you all are kind of approaching this issue or considering the severity of it?
No, it's not. I think the chief and I have both spoken to that we have constructive work to do. We have done a lot of work in the last 2 months. We've built a lot of bridges. The council has acted. The police department has acted. That work will continue, and it will get stronger and gain momentum. And so my take is there's always a small group of people that don't want to engage in that work. They don't want to engage in that partnership and collaboration and problem solving. They're more interested in making a statement and doing it with destruction. And so they're not going to deter us from the good work that we can do together.
Thank you. We'll do 2 more questions.
Mayor Vinis, Council, as I'm sure Chief Skinner's position is apparently obvious. In the dialogue here, in the movement, whether it's people who are co-opting it or people who are part of it, some of the dialogue is still very much anti-law enforcement, for one thing or another. I don't mean defund. is not a policy discussion. And that 2 months into this, we are still very much seeing acronyms that I can't repeat in this form. How do we advance this conversation constructively?
This is about building relationships and building trust. And we've all met with members of the Black Unity. We've met with other leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, and this is a steady, sustained effort to build relationships and build trust, so that we're using the same language and we're understanding where we have common ground and where we can move forward. That's the work before us. That's the hard work.
No, we're in a lot better position than a lot of other cities that are experiencing this type of violence. We have an open dialogue with the police department. The chief has reached out to various leaders in many of these groups. And that dialogue is open, it's continuing, and it will move us forward. Based on what we're going to do with the ad hoc committee, we're going to take a deep dive into policies, procedures, and tactics, and we'll make some recommendations for policy modifications or policy changes where it's deemed necessary. But I'm really pleased with how Chief Skinner has handled this, and also with how some of the leaders in the various groups that have been out in the street have also conducted themselves. I'd note Black Unity, because Black Unity has been in support of a number of these demonstrations. There are members of Black Unity with the school with my sons. So I know these guys, and their intent is to do good and not to do damage, and not to do violence, and not to do vandalism. No mayhem, no. That's basically it. We're going to continue to work together. We're going to continue to focus. This council is fully behind the chief, but we're also in support of Black Lives Matter. I can speak for two of them. But we want to see justice, and we want to see equity in our relationships, in community relationships between the community and the police. And as you probably know, that history has been fraught with a lot of turmoil with police agencies all over the country for many, many years. But we're making some significant, substantial changes, and we're going to be able to come out with a better product at the end of this.
I have one more question here for Chief Skinner. Referring to the arrest of the 14-year-old, do you think it was necessary to have 3 or more officers on that one individual? And what constitutes unnecessary force when arresting?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. As I pointed out earlier, from a distance, there's no chance we know that this person's 14 years old. What we see is a female that has the ability to throw rocks at police officers. There is a minimum number of officers to effect an arrest, regardless of who it is. And generally, it's two. Generally, it's 2 to take somebody into custody, and then in that environment, a person kind of watching to see if anybody's going to intervene to protect those officers. So what you saw was a fairly standard approach to an arrest, regardless of who it is. Excessive force is something that there's 2 parts to that. Part is whether the force that the tactics and the technique that we used was justified, and then the amount that we use within that framework, whether that's justified. And some of that is a response to an individual's resistance. And so you can think of use of force and response to resistance very similarly that way, is that somebody that is resisting arrest obviously looks like more force is being used. But in that particular case, based on what I've seen, and like every other use of force situation we have, it goes into our system and it gets investigated and categorized with the help of the auditor's office. And so that one will be looked at just like anything else we do.